In March of 2025, Microsoft's license to work with one Chinese company quietly expired, and Washington never renewed it. That company had already lost Android 6 years earlier. Now, it had lost Windows too. Locked out of both of the operating systems that run almost every computer on Earth. So, it built its own. And this September, that operating system walks into Chinese government offices as a commercial desktop PC. Not a phone, a desktop. In the exact chair Windows has occupied for 40 years. Stick around, because the interesting part is not that Huawei built an OS. It's the specific engineering trade it made to get there. One that cost the company its entire app library. And why Beijing is now writing that trade into procurement law. Smash that like button. It genuinely helps these deep dives reach people. And subscribe so you catch the chip side of this story next week. The Lockout, May 2019. The United States Commerce Department added Huawei to something called the Entity List. Think of the Entity List as a hardware firewall rule applied to an entire company. Any American supplier that wants to ship Huawei a chip, a license, or a line of code now needs an export permit first. Default, deny. And the permits mostly did not come. The first thing to break was Google Mobile Services. If you're an engineer, GMS is the part that matters. Android Open Source Project is the public kernel and framework layer. Anyone can compile it. But GMS is the proprietary services layer sitting on top. Push notifications, location services, in-app payments, the Play Store itself. Strip GMS out, and you still have a booting Android device. You just have one where half your installed apps fail their dependency checks at runtime. Huawei phones sold outside China still ran Android. They just could not run the apps people had actually paid for. The numbers moved fast. Huawei shipped roughly 240 million smartphones in 2019, second in the world, ahead of Apple. By the third quarter of 2021, Counterpoint Research measured shipments down 84% year-on-year to under 6 million units in a quarter. Huawei's own rotating chairman, Eric Xu, told reporters he expected smartphone revenue to fall by $30 to $40 billion in a single year, down from about $50 billion. And this decision seemed survivable at the time. It was not, because a second lockout was running in parallel, and almost nobody covered it. Huawei's Windows relationship was never severed with a press release. It ran on a license, and licenses expire. That license lapsed in March 2025, and the renewal never came. Meanwhile, export controls tightened around the Intel and AMD processors that virtually every Windows laptop depends on. No x86 silicon, no Windows license, no laptop business. Two doors, same building, both locked within a few years of each other. And there is no engineering workaround for a legal restriction. You cannot patch your way past an export control. And I want to be precise about why the second lockout hit harder than the first, because the coverage almost always gets this backwards. Losing Google was a product problem, painful, expensive, but bounded. Huawei could still build the phone and still sell it domestically, where Google services are blocked anyway. The company lost its overseas market, not its ability to manufacture. Losing the Windows path was structural. To ship a Windows laptop, you need 3 things at once: a Microsoft license, an x86 processor, and a driver stack certified against both. Export controls took the processor. The license expiry took the software. A year after the Entity List, in May 2020, Washington tightened again. The new rule reached beyond American companies entirely. Any foundry, anywhere on Earth, using American equipment in its process, now needed a permit to fabricate a Huawei-designed chip. That is the one that actually bit. Practically every advanced foundry on the planet uses American tooling somewhere in the line. Huawei had already designed the Kirin 9000. It simply could not get it manufactured. So by 2021, the company was in a position that would end most businesses. It could design silicon it could not fabricate, and write software for platforms it was no longer licensed to ship on. The pivot. August 2019, 3 months after the Entity List. Huawei announced HarmonyOS. The reception was brutal, and honestly, it was earned. The first shipping product was a television, not a phone, not a laptop, a TV. And when independent developers pulled apart the early builds, they found large sections of Android open source project code still sitting underneath. Different launcher, different branding, same foundation. Analysts called it a rebrand, a political announcement wearing a product costume. On the technical evidence available in 2019, that read was correct. What almost nobody outside Huawei's engineering org knew was that version 1 was never the target. It was a compatibility shim. Ship something that runs today's apps, keep the hardware business breathing, and buy time for the rewrite happening in parallel. That is a completely standard migration pattern in software. Keep the legacy runtime alive while the replacement gets built underneath it. What was not standard was the timeline. Most companies give a rewrite 18 months before leadership loses patience and kills it. Huawei gave this one 5 years and absorbed 5 years of public mockery to protect it. Nobody was paying much attention to what was happening on that second track. That was about to change. The 5-year rebuild. October 2024. Huawei shipped HarmonyOS Next, 0 AOSP code. No Android compatibility layer, no Linux kernel underneath. Huawei replaced it with its own microkernel and its own toolchain, DevEco Studio for development, Ark Compiler for compilation, ArkTS as the language, ArkUI for the interface layer. If you write software, you already know what that sentence means. That is not a fork. That is a full stack replacement. New kernel, new compiler, new language runtime, new UI framework. Every one of those is a multi-year project by itself, and each has to be stable before the layer above it can be trusted. Before the architecture, watch what it does. You drag a photo off your phone screen and drop it onto the laptop next to it. No cable, no upload, no sync dialog. Get in the car and the dashboard already has the destination you looked up on the phone 20 minutes ago. That behavior is not a feature someone added. It falls out of a design decision made at the kernel. And the microkernel choice deserves a minute on its own, because it is the decision everything else hangs off. Linux, which Android sits on, is a monolithic kernel. Drivers, file systems, and network stacks all run inside kernel space with full privileges. It is fast because everything is in the same address space. But a fault in any driver can take the whole system down. And the trusted computing base is enormous. Millions of lines of privileged code. A microkernel keeps almost nothing in kernel space. Scheduling, memory, inter-process messaging, and that is roughly it. Drivers and file systems get pushed out into user space as isolated processes. A misbehaving driver crashes itself instead of the machine. The trade is performance. Every time a user space driver talks to another component, it costs a context switch. And context switches are expensive. That is why microkernels have mostly stayed in aerospace and defense, where a formally verifiable trusted base is worth the overhead. Huawei chose the aerospace answer for a consumer operating system. And once you understand who the buyer is, that stops looking like an engineering preference and starts looking like a procurement strategy. A small, auditable, trusted computing base is exactly what a government security certification is built to measure. And they wired it for distribution from the start. The same system image targets phones, tablets, laptops, wearables, car dashboards, and smart home hardware, sharing one security model and one update pipeline. Apple has been doing a version of this for years across iPhone, Mac, and Watch. And Apple had 2 decades and total control of its own hardware to get there. Now here is the cost. And this is the part most coverage skips. Dropping the compatibility layer means every existing Android app stops working. Not degraded, gone. Every developer serving Chinese users had to rewrite their application in ArkTS from scratch, targeting a platform with no installed base yet. In January 2025, HarmonyOS Next had roughly 20,000 native apps. Android has millions. Huawei's argument was that the top 5,000 apps cover about 99% of what Chinese users actually open, which is a genuinely defensible claim about usage distribution, and also a claim that quietly writes off the long tail entirely. By HDC 2026 this June, Huawei reported HarmonyOS had passed Apple's iOS to become China's second largest mobile platform, behind Android. Counterpoint had it at 17% of the mainland market, against 16% for iOS as of mid-2025. I mean, think about that for a second. They deleted their entire app catalog on purpose and grew market share anyway. Why Microsoft should care? China is the largest personal computer market on the planet. And in early 2025, Windows held roughly 80% of it. That is the number Microsoft should be watching, because it is not a market share figure. It is a dependency graph with a single point of failure sitting in Redmond, Washington. Updates, licensing, support lifecycle, all controlled from one jurisdiction that had already demonstrated, publicly, that it will pull the plug for policy reasons. Huawei was the proof of concept. Every Chinese CIO watched what happened when that single point of failure was deliberately triggered. Then, 2 things landed at once. First, Microsoft ended support for Windows 10 on October the 14th, 2025. No more security patches. Hundreds of millions of machines, globally, forced into a decision they had been deferring for years. If you have ever managed enterprise IT, you know a forced upgrade cycle is the only window where anyone seriously considers changing platforms. Migration cost is what keeps incumbents in place. Once the organization is already paying that cost, the calculation opens up. Second, and this is the piece that makes the timing look deliberate. In 2022, the Wall Street Journal reported on an internal directive called Document 79, requiring state-owned enterprises in finance, energy, and other strategic sectors to replace foreign software in their IT systems by 2027 with quarterly progress reports. I want to flag the sourcing here honestly because it matters. Georgetown's Center for Security and Emerging Technology published a translation of the publicly available version of Document 79. And that public version contains no software replacement clause at all. The 2027 mandate comes from journal reporting on the restricted version, not from a document anyone outside Beijing can read. So treat the deadline as credible reporting, not confirmed policy. The broader localization push it sits inside, called Xinchuang, is very much public and very much funded. But the fact this act actually turns on is not reported at all. It is published, it is dated, and anybody can look it up. In January 2026, China's Information Technology Security Evaluation Center published its security and reliability ratings. The HarmonyOS PC operating system received Level 2. It is the first operating system of any kind to clear Level 1, and no other PC or server operating system on that list holds Level 2. That is not marketing, and it is not a leak. It is the specific gate a product has to clear before a government department is permitted to purchase it. Huawei is now the only company through it. The honest pivot. Now, I want to be straight with you about where this argument gets weak, because a lot of coverage on this topic will not do that. The app problem outside China is not close to solved, and there is a hard economic reason why. Ask an international developer to build a native ArkTS version of their app. It is a full rewrite, not a port. Their return on that work is access to a market where per-user revenue is a fraction of what they earn in North America or Europe, on a platform with no meaningful installed base outside China. That maths does not close. It has nothing to do with politics and everything to do with engineering budgets. Outside China, HarmonyOS Next still has no Gmail, no YouTube, no WhatsApp. There are workarounds. Workarounds are not an ecosystem. There is a second problem, and it is the one enterprise IT actually fears. Decades of Chinese banking, hospital, and government software was written against Windows APIs, some of it dating to the 2000s, with the original developer long out of business. Replacing the operating system means rewriting that software, retraining staff, and revalidating compliance on systems where downtime is measured in regulatory fines. Windows did not win on quality, it won on inertia. And inertia is genuinely hard to beat. And Huawei's own track record deserves skepticism. This is a company with a long pattern of announcing milestones ahead of shipping them. The September desktop launch that opened this video is confirmed by Zhu Dongdong, president of Huawei's tablet and PC product line. But the processor, the core configuration, and the price were all absent from the demonstration unit. Both things are true at the same time. This is a real structural threat to Windows inside China, and it is an unresolved adoption problem everywhere else. Neither of those cancels the other one out. The global play. Huawei is not selling an operating system to these countries. It is selling insurance against ever being cut off the way Huawei itself was cut off in 2019. And it is selling that policy to buyers it already has a relationship with, because whoever builds the network usually ends up shaping what runs on top of it. Huawei spent 2 decades laying telecom infrastructure across Southeast Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and Latin America. In Africa, its components sit inside roughly 70% of 4G network infrastructure. A ministry that already trusts Huawei to keep its phone network running has almost no friction moving its office desktops to the same vendor. The procurement relationship exists, the security clearances exist, the engineers are already on site. And this is where the app gap argument stops mattering. Huawei is not trying to win a consumer app war outside China. Governments do not need TikTok on their procurement machines. They need email, documents, spreadsheets, and a supplier that a foreign export control cannot switch off. The hardware finally matches that pitch. The MateBook Pro that launched in May 2025 runs on the Kirin X90, a 10-core ARM-based processor Huawei designed in-house, supporting Chinese national cryptography standards SM3 and SM4 at the silicon level. That last detail is the one worth sitting with. When your crypto standards, your silicon, your kernel, your compiler, and your applications are all domestic, there is no layer left for anyone to lean on. That last detail is the one worth sitting with. When your crypto standards, your silicon, your kernel, your compiler, and your applications are all domestic, there is no layer left for anyone to lean on. Look at what that stack actually contains now. Kirin silicon, fabricated at SMIC, a microkernel with no Linux inheritance, a compiler toolchain with no LLVM dependency, national cryptography, domestic applications. Every one of those layers exists because a restriction forced it to. The entity list did not slow the stack down, it specified it. And the products are not hypothetical anymore. Huawei ships the MateBook Pro at around $1,100 and the MateBook Fold, an 18-inch foldable OLED machine, at roughly $3,300 with no physical keyboard at all. Two commercial models, the HM740 and the HM940, are already aimed at government and corporate procurement. The commercial hardware shown at HDC 2026 included features that only make sense for institutional buyers. Dual space separation that keeps work and personal environments cryptographically isolated on the same machine. And a dedicated security processor. None of that competes with a MacBook on consumer terms. It is not supposed to. It competes on a procurement checklist. And on a procurement checklist, a Level 2 certification outranks a benchmark score every single time. That is the part other capitals are studying. Not whether Huawei wins, but that the roadmap now exists and somebody else already paid to build it. There is now a complete, sanctions-proof computing stack sitting on the shelf, certified, priced, and shipping. And once an option is sitting right there on the shelf, it rarely stays limited to one country for very long. Microsoft has not lost anything yet. Windows still runs the overwhelming majority of computers on this planet, and that is not changing this year or next year. But the exact playbook that took Apple's share in one enormous market is now pointed at Windows in that same market, backed by the same procurement preferences and the same willingness to wait 5 years. That commercial desktop ships in September. Trial deployments were scheduled for July and August. We will know how real this is within a few months. The real question is not whether HarmonyOS replaces Windows globally. It almost certainly will not, at least not soon. The question is what every other government does now that they no longer have to wonder whether this is possible. Somebody else already absorbed the cost of proving it. All that is left for anyone watching is deciding whether to reach for it. So tell me in the comments, does HarmonyOS have a genuine shot outside China? Or does Windows' 40-year infrastructure moat hold? I read these. Subscribe and hit the bell, because next week we go one layer down into the silicon, into how SMIC is producing 7nm Kirin chips without EUV lithography, and whether that is actually sustainable.